Mhm. Peter? Hello, Peter?
Hey, George. Okay, we're live on YouTube.
We are live. How are you, Peter?
It's cold. It's really, really cold.
Winter in Moscow. That's
Well,
yeah, go on.
it's very strange because I think right now it's -4 centigrade. You know, that's cold.
That's not that cold. Yeah.
It's like it's much colder than -4. Okay.
Right. Yeah. And -4. It doesn't sound. You know, by Russian standards, -4 doesn't sound too bad, but it is cold. I mean, -4 is cold anywhere.
Well, I mean, it's particularly gruesome because 2 days ago it was relatively warm and had been snow, and then it melted, and then the cold snap, and then so everything is icy. So
yes,
scuffling along, it's very easy to fall, and if you fall, it hurts.
yes.
At tender age, it hurts a lot.
Oh no, definitely. It's ice is really the that's the hard part of winter. The ice and yeah, and people hurt themselves. I slipped on ice, and boy, you know, you hurt yourself. You know, if you're and if you fall on your face, boy, that hurts. So, yeah.
Well, I fell on my hand, and it was sprained for like 3 weeks. I mean, it was serious. So
yeah.
So as I always tell people visiting, respect the weather, respect it, bundle up, okay?
Anyway, we've got our friends at the Gagglers who have already joined us. Nigel Baird, nice to see you again. It's always good to have you here. And we have Elvis Grr, which I think is good. And then Elvis says it's balmy in Nebraska. Very weird. I wouldn't have imagined that it would be balmy in Nebraska. So I don't know. And then here Nebin Dog says cold here on the northeast shore of Lake Michigan. Yeah, I that's how I would have imagined.
I can appreciate that.
That's right. I don't know. Nebraska is always one of these states that it's kind of the butt of humor. I don't know if you ever saw that movie Unforgiven with there was a great scene where Richard Harris kind of confronts Little Bill, played by Gene Hackman, and he said, you know, Bill, I thought you were dead. No, just living in Nebraska.
Kansas gets the short end of the stick too.
Yes, no, that's right. Well, I guess the Nebraska is just it's so kind of far out there that you just sort of you don't even know what the hell's going on up there. So I think that's.
Well, I mean, I've driven across the United States a number of times, and Kansas, Nebraska, whatever, it all looks the same. It's the same. It's like it's the American steppe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. And you have these big states. You know, they're all kind of drawn up like little squares, and so there are hardly anyone lives there, but they take up a lot of room.
And one thing you notice, I'm sorry, the only thing you notice, corn.
Yes.
Or what looks like corn, at least.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. But it's kind of impressive because then you look at it and say, wow, it really does look like the breadbasket of the world. I mean, it's like, I think Lyndon Johnson, I think, referred to it, well, we're going to be the breadbasket of the world. And just look, because you have fields and fields of corn. And so that's kind of
yeah, well, it's all agro-business. It's basically monopoly.
Yeah,
it's oligarchic. I mean, there are ranchers out there and things like, and I respect people that work, that do real work. There's very few people who do real work anymore. But a great deal of the agricultural sector is subsidized and run by oligarchs, and it's really terrorizing. You can only use certain seed and, you know, certain distributor. I mean, it's really, it's a racket.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So the Washington Post today is has running a big story about they have it on good authority from unnamed intelligence officials that Russia is planning to invade Ukraine sometime in January. I've never heard of invasions taking place in the middle of winter, yeah, but that's me. So that they've got that, but of course they are all unnamed official, and of course it has nothing to do with the fact that next week, I guess there's going to be the online summit between Putin and Biden. No, I think that hasn't been firmly sketched in, but it's expected to take place next week. So, you know, obviously you got this coming through. Oh, the plans have already been drawn up. And you kind of wonder, well, these intelligence, how do they know this? I mean, you know, did they take part in these meetings, you know, when they drew up all these maps, you know, all right, you know, you drive here, I drive there, you know, and, you know, we'll meet in the middle. It's amazing how, you know, these unnamed intelligence officials, you know all about these secret Russian military plans.
Why is it unnamed? I mean, nobody wants to get out there and say the truth or something. I mean, these are issues of war and peace. You know, and you know, what is Russia's, if this in fact is happening, which it is not, everyone. I live here, no one's talking about going to war. No one is talking about it. Okay. Except for they're talking about it, what we're doing, which we are not. Okay. But what is the war aim, George?
That's a good point. Exactly. That's normally the question you'd ask. What would be the goal of this war? So yeah, then that's never spelled out. It kind of works on the assumption that the Russians are always planning on invading, and if we don't get tough with Russia, they will invade. You know, wherever it is, you know, Russia is going to invade. I think that's their operating assumption, but they never explain what is it. I mean, why would they do it now? What's, you know, and what would be the objective attained by this?
Okay, let's look at recent history. Let's go back to August 2018. Saakashvili uses his military force to militarily assault South Ossetia. Now, South Ossetia was in dispute. The first post-communist leader in Georgia was Gamsa. He had a virulent, very, very rabid Georgian nationalism. South Ossetia, well, people there are Ossetians, okay? They're not Georgians, okay? And Abkhazians, they're not Georgians, they're Abkhazians. We go back, George and I have talked about this many times. Stalin, the great cartographer, did this all on purpose to make sure Moscow would adjudicate everything. So Saakashvili attacks. Russia, having internationally recognized peacekeeping forces there, they were attacked and members of the peacekeeping force were killed. Civilians were killed. The Russians reacted. President Medvedev was president at the time and pushed hard. I mean, really hard, as the Russians do, okay? And dispensed with the Georgian forces, which they probably believed this was a weekend operation, because you know we're just going to go in, you know, they'll run away, and we got America's got our back because the president Saakashvili says so, and you know, and given a nod and a wink from people like Condoleezza Rice. You want to jump in and say something real quick?
No, go on. No.
Okay, and so what happens is they push in. South Ossetia is liberated. They go as far down to a city called Gori, and then what did they do, George? They went home. That's right.
Yeah.
So why didn't they take Tbilisi? Why not? It's there. It was completely undefended.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And
cities like Gori, they just ran away. They ran away.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And that's always this argument that they make about this. So the Russian invasion. Which is, Russia invaded Georgia, you know, and your friend Fiona Hill always is repeating this. And again, they didn't. They essentially, what the Russians did was a restoration of the status quo ante, which was the South Ossetia retained its autonomy. It is Saakashvili who destroyed the status quo ante, and the Russians just simply restored it. But they did make Saakashvili pay the price, which is that they recognized the independence of South Ossetia. Up until then, the Russians accepted that South Ossetia was part of Georgia. But after what he did, it was essentially, that's it. They recognized the independent South Ossetia and Abkhazia as independent states, which is, I think, reasonable. I mean, Saakashvili had to pay, Georgia had to pay a price for launching an unnecessary war. And
let's take Ukraine now. Okay, there's the illegal transfer of power, a coup d'état in February of 2014 in Kiev. The new government, laced with neo-Nazis and fascists,
right.
well documented.
Yes.
We can talk about the contrived tragedy on Maidan, but we'll put that as a sidebar right now. This government came to power illegally. And what was one of the first things they did? They started an anti-terrorist operation against the parts of the country that had voted for Donbass, Donetsk, and Crimea. Okay, so go to war. These people, the Kiev government is killing his own people. 14,000 people to date have been killed, and Russia never invaded Ukraine.
Right.
Never. What we did was there was support for the fighters in the Donbass. Yeah, I have no doubt about that at all. No doubt at all. Okay. Right. For example, if you're in the military and Sarge, can I have the weekend off? The week out? Cause I got to go visit my uncle and aunt in the Donbass. Yeah, go right. That's fine.
Right.
You're on firm.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I'm not denying that it helps the Donbass, not at all. Okay, but didn't incorporate it into Russia.
Right.
They
and
made
also,
it unitary.
And that's the thing. There is nothing at all unreasonable in Russia doing that, and Russia providing assistance to their co-nationals. I mean, they are their own people. In doing that, they are doing exactly what every other state would do, which is we're not going to allow our co-nationals to be massacred, to be bombed, to be punished, to be sanctioned, or whatever. That's what countries do. And I've made this point before. When Turkey invaded Cyprus in 1974, it was with a view to protecting the Turkish Cypriots. And more notably, when India invaded what was then East Pakistan, they did it in order to protect their East Bengalis. The West Bengalis were in India. East Bengalis became part of Pakistan. They did it, and that's what countries do. And in fact, they did it. In the case of India and Turkey, did it far more overtly than Russia did. I mean, they actually sent in their army to protect their co-nationals. That's what people do. Now, did the Russians, like as you say, did the Russians cheat here and there? Yeah, that's it. But they did it in a way which is, I think, entirely in keeping with a country's national interest. They have a national interest in protecting their own people. Every country has that.
Well, I mean, you and I are not fans of right to protect this doctrine because it's illegal. However, what Russia did during the attack, when Kiev was attacking the Donbass, it was practicing a form of right to protect. And a lot of people, you've got to understand, everybody, is that, yes, Ukraine is a foreign country. It is a sovereign country. But the way the Soviet Union was designed and dissolved, it's still a messy affair. Right. And people have to understand that the fate of the people in eastern and southern Ukraine is a domestic political issue in Russia.
Right.
Because what people don't understand, reading these rags like the Washington Post, is that I remember it vividly, like it was yesterday, is that, Putin is power grabbing Ukraine, Putin is doing this, and you know what people in Russia were saying? He's not doing enough.
Excellent.
He really got the worst of both worlds. He's not doing enough.
That's right. It's entirely reminiscent of Milosevic. You know, Milosevic, who was constantly attacked in the West. Oh, he's creating greater Serbia. You know, he's whipping up, you know, Serbian nationalism in Croatia and in Bosnia. But Milosevic was hated in Serbia because he wasn't doing enough. He said, you're betraying our people. You're doing nothing to help our people. So, and so that's exactly the point. I mean, you know, after all, you know, it is inherent in people that they want their nationals protected, particularly in the aftermath of an extremely messy and basically disgraceful dissolution of a common state. Because I think, you know, you don't just dissolve a common state just like that and you say, oh, well, that's it, you know, goodbye. Just like you don't dissolve a marriage just like that and say, oh, well, that's it, you know, you go your way, I go mine. And so there's no discussion about common property, you know, how much everyone's entitled to, what happens to children, you know, remuneration in the coming years. Those are the issues that courts decide when a marriage is dissolved. But here, when we just dissolve a state, adios, we get to keep, you know, what we have, and you get to keep what you have. Yeah, that's when wars break out.
And you have to look at the demographics of the Donbass. As much as the majority, and clearly a majority, possibly a super majority, have petitioned in the past to be recognized as part of Russia. A Ossetian solution. They're not looking for independence. They want absorption. Because prior to that, again, there are international borders, but George, the people, you know, live on one side of the border, work on the other. They cross international border every day. Okay.
Right.
All right. Because it's one group of people. Now, one of the reasons that the Russian side very, very hesitant in using an option like Ossetia is that there are a lot of Ukrainians also in the Donbass, okay? And one lesson, you know, rebuilding the Soviet Union is absolutely nonsense. One lesson the Russian political leadership has learned is don't rule over people that don't want to be ruled over by us, right. Okay? It's a headache, okay? Yeah, that's and right. So that, because again of, you know, how Ukraine came about as a modern state, how it was transformed during the Soviet era, and then what it was left with when the Soviet Union came to an end. It's just one big patchwork of a mess, okay? And we're seeing it being played out.
Yeah, well, that's it. And that's the thing. I mean, it's like, oh, it's a separate state. Well, yes, since the day before yesterday, because it only became a separate state, you know, like a couple of days ago. And so therefore, what were administrative boundaries within a common state, suddenly, oh, they're now international frontiers. Oh, that's a sovereign state. Well, legally, yes, because, you know, they mutually recognized one another, but you know, in effect, they are still administrative boundaries, and therefore, you know, many of these issues have not been settled. The issue of Crimea was notably not settled by, you know, because of the way the Soviet Union dissolved itself. And, you know, these parts of Ukraine, which the Donbass, Kharkov, that was part of Russia. I mean, it's like, you know, this was a completely arbitrary decision by the Bolsheviks to hand all this territory over to Ukraine. And now Ukraine says, oh, we get to keep it. Thank you. You know, we're good to go. And, you know, in a way, yes, it's true. But it's obviously, it doesn't really solve any problems, because it's one thing to say, oh, okay, this is now part of Ukraine when it's within a common state. It's quite another thing to say, yeah, it's within Ukraine as an independent state, which might at any time be taken over by a bunch of Nazis. So, I mean, that's a very different proposition for the people who actually live in that part of Ukraine.
Well, and all of this talk, again, you know, I've been watching this war hysteria as well. We'll discuss it tomorrow on Crosstalk as well, is that, you know, if you step back, and that's what George and I do, is if you step back, look at the countries that are most adamant about protecting Ukrainian sovereignty and statehood. Well, these people are the ones that have compromised it the most, okay? Right. Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Piat, okay, right. The whole Biden, the whole Obama cabal that now basically work in the Biden administration. Right. I mean, the way I look at it, and you and I have talked about this since the advent of the Biden administration is that, do these people have unfinished business? Is that how they feel about it?
Right,
Okay.
right.
Because
Yeah.
Gloria Newland, she's got to be smarting. You got to be smarting, George, because, you know, the prize wasn't Ukraine. The prize was Crimea. That was the prize. Okay, that was it, because you would challenge Russia's geopolitical strategic position in the Black Sea and its ability to break out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean, into the greater part of the world. Okay, that was the prize, and she muffed it. She muffed the prize.
Right, right. No, I think it is unfinished business. So anyway, there's a question here from Herman Montoya, a good friend of ours. He says, "Why is the Western media saying that Russia will invade Ukraine? Why do you think they're talking up the prospects of an invasion?"
Isn't this really remarkable since the advent of Russiagate? I mean, there were elements of it before, but since Russiagate, it's the media that is saying, what are you going to do about Russia? How are you going to push back? I mean, and the Biden administration, which I think is wrong-footed on just about everything. I don't think they have any coherent idea with Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken there. What do you expect? I mean, this is junior varsity people, okay?
Right.
And so what, you know, and it's something I'm going to put in the introduction of tomorrow's program, that Biden said, you know, I don't recognize anyone's red lines. I don't know who told them that, but that's dumb. That's really dumb.
When did you say
that? Was in the article. I sent you the Fox News article.
Oh, okay, it's in the Fox News article. Okay. That's a good one. I like that.
Okay, I want you to let that percolate in your mind overnight. So when we
right. Because it reminds me of. I mean, we talked about this last week about Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, who says that no one has a veto on who joins NATO. Russia does not have. Ukraine is a sovereign state. It's only up to NATO members in Ukraine to decide whether Ukraine joins NATO. As if NATO is just a supper club. Well, shall we invite this person to join the supper club? But no one else other than the members of the supper club have a say in who joins. Well, yeah, you do. I mean, I think that if you're a security threat to someone else, then they are going to have a say in whether you're going to expand your military alliance right next to its country.
Everything about international relations, all you really need to know is read the Peloponnesian War. Okay, that's it. And look at the different city-states that were trying to create coalitions, and one say, no, he's next door, I can't do it. Okay, I mean, this is in time immemorial. Why people like Stoltenberg and NATO say these are sovereign countries, they can choose alliances? Well, yeah, that's just words. Okay, that's not geopolitical reality, because if you're going to induct one member and by doing so creating instability on that member's border, no. That's why we have international relations. Okay,
right.
Why?
Exactly.
Why this is this the supper club ideology now? Because that's what it sounds like. It doesn't make any historical sense.
Not at all. It's bizarre, and that's why Russia says that we decided when we met in Helsinki in 1975 at the Helsinki conference, which was that security is indivisible. So that we have a right to security and you have a right to security, and that's the principle according to which we will conduct our relations. We don't have kind of one country deciding, we can do whatever we like for our security, but we don't give a damn about your security. That was the point that was enshrined at the Helsinki conference. But the West has just sort of lost that side of that and just like, well, we can do what we like. We can expand where we like. We can deploy weapons where we like. And you don't have a say in the matter. Well, that's when you get into the trouble that you're getting into now. Because, I think the tone of the Russians is now much more serious than it has been at any time. When you listen to Putin, you listen to Lavrov, they are in no mood for any more of this Western BS. I mean, they said we talk about the red lines, and he said, now you're going to start deploying intermediate range missiles on our border, on Poland's borders, on Romania's borders, and we're tired of all this. Yeah, exactly, and exactly. You're coming up, within a few miles of our borders. and they really are not in the mood now. I mean, yes, they're always very polite, our Western partners, our Western colleagues, but they're making clear that we have just about had it, and we're not going to, listen to any more of this disingenuous nonsense. Like, oh well, the Minsk Accords, as if somehow that Russia is not complying with Minsk Accords. And so I think the Russia really they're very serious now.
Russia's not a signatory of the Minsk Agreement. Okay? It's not even mentioned in it.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And again, it's on the internet. I mean, you type in Minsk Accords, you get it up. It's there it is. Also, everything is spelled out in the Minsk Accords.
Well, what do you expect? Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken weren't born when the Helsinki process was in process, George. Okay, I mean, what George said there is such a pearl of wisdom. Okay, you cannot demand another country to compromise their security in favor of your own. Okay, that's why we have international politics. All right, and so what? Let me give you a preview, everyone. They've already dangled. There are sanctions that we can employ that we have kept close to our vest. I'll tell you what that is. It's the Swiss system.
The SWIFT. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah,
and that's look. I'll tell you how the Russians look at it. Are the costs insurmountable? No, not anymore. I mean, we don't have Russia has no direct relationship with NATO, has no direct relationship with the EU now. I mean, everything is falling apart. There's not much left to salvage.
Right. That's right. Anyway, we got a super chat from our friend Dr. Lin. Thank you so much. Very, very kind of you. Really appreciate it. And she says, keep up the great work. We'll try. Thank you so much. And we also have a super chat from our friend Spectre in the Air. So nice to have you back, Spectre. It says, hi guys, Biden saying something dumb is nothing new. Sadly, how can we address the incompetent elites? They love war. It's a game to them. It is an interesting issue that when you look at this, Biden who comes on, rambling incoherently, the thing that you just quoted. And then yesterday, I think it was on Hannity, Hannity had Pelosi, kind of a complete bizarre, I don't know if you saw that. She was talking about bird baths or bird seeds, or I don't know what the hell she was on about. And it is, and then I think Hannity, I mean, we're no fans of Hannity, but he did make a point. This is the #1 and the #3 person in the country, and they're just rambling complete. I mean, imagine if this were, 1980, and then Brezhnev comes along, and then he just starts rambling about bird baths and bird seeds, and, how would the rest of the world result? Hey, God, this is really terrible. This is dangerous. This great superpower is in the hands of somebody who doesn't know what time of day it is. But we've kind of got used to this.
You've mentioned the #1 and #3 in the political pecking order. They don't even mention the second one, and she can't blame senile being senile. Okay, I mean, she's not old. Okay, she's just dumb. Okay, no, I mean, I think one of the things. George and I are going to do a book review of this guy that wrote I read half of it already. And there's one paragraph. It's an okay book. It's okay. But there's one paragraph that's really, really quite revealing is how the donor class ends up being, they flip, before the donors would appeal to politicians. Now it's the other way around. It's the donors that basically blackmail politicians. Okay, and we have this paradigm shift here. And the reason why I'm mentioning this here is that it doesn't matter how competent the elites are, as long as they serve their purpose. They don't care about anything else. As a matter of fact, they probably get a lot of amusement out of it. Okay, because superficially, Donald Trump's tweets. Okay, Joe Biden, has an incident at the Vatican. Okay, all that is just, it's just the daily news cycle. But at the end of the day, you still have a transfer of wealth to the top. You have the shuttering of American industry. You have the displacement theory being reality. All these things are going on. And then people are saying, Joe Biden is drooling. Okay, well, for the donor class, it's all nice and fine. They don't care. All right. And they all own the media.
Right. But, yeah, I think the donor class, and of course the deep state, you know, the people who actually wield the power, who apparently make decisions without too much political oversight. And so there's Brett Harris says, Putin said that if NATO puts offensive weapons in Ukraine, he will put hypersonic missiles in 5-minute range from those who make the decisions. So, I mean, I think that again, you know, Putin is really being very serious. He's saying that, you know, you are now really threatening our security. You know, we had that NATO Russia Foundation agreement that was signed in 1997, in which NATO pretty promised, that was before the NATO expansion, that was 1997, said we will not you know, essentially deploy heavy you know, military in the East. And so in any way in which it's a threat to Russian security. And it's a bit vague what it says, but at least they said, no, we're not going to deploy. So, you know, even though NATO is expanding, that doesn't mean that we're going to start deploying, you know, serious troops in the East. But they are not doing it. And they're going far beyond what was even envisaged in the original NATO expansion. And so now when they start talking about putting missiles, which are intermediate range missiles, they're going to basically be able to reach Moscow and St. Petersburg really in a matter of minutes, and they're going to put them on the borders of Poland and Romania. You know, Russians say, well, we're sick of this. We're tired of all of your promises. You break all of your promises, and then you accuse us of nonsense. Like, you know, we're not adhering to the Minsk Accords, and so that's why I think this is much more. What the Russians now saying, Putin and Lavrov, the tone is, I think, much more serious than I've ever heard from them.
I'm not very technically adept here. I was going to check a document, but I'm afraid I'm going to turn this off. So I'm just going to paraphrase here. Lavrov said is we're returning to an era of possible military confrontation. I'm paraphrasing here, but even the paraphrase, something
like that, yeah.
Even right. The paraphrase should set the hair on the back of your head up. Okay, yeah. I mean, for someone of such credentials and professionalism to say something like that, it's serious business here. And so, look, anyone sitting in the Kremlin, when you sit in the pinnacle of power in Russia, the ghosts of Napoleon and Hitler are never far from you. Okay, and like I said, what is the cost? You know, taking someone's word that is broken over and over and over again for 30 years. That's right. Yeah. Okay, yeah. And then, you know, when you know, Obama had his red lines on Syria, who saved the day? Putin saved the day. He came in, ascertained what kind of chemicals, weapons program Syria had. It had been covert, and took that off the table. And instantly, Obama turned on Putin. Okay, no, I mean, everybody says, you know, why? You know, Putin must be racist. He doesn't like Obama. No, Obama's a liar. That's right. Yeah, exactly. He saved Obama's face, because Obama had been let down by the British. I mean, he thought, well, okay, we're going to bomb Syria. And then, to his amazement, the British Parliament voted. It's like, you know, because I can't remember who was the Prime Minister. That was, I think, was Cameron. Cameron was Prime Minister. He did a very, very foolish thing. You know, he left it to Parliament. You never let the voters have a say in anything. You know, that's the last thing you ever want to do. So he said, well, we'll let Parliament decide. Well, Parliament said, we don't want any part of it. Yeah, and what's, you know, Theresa May, she never made that mistake. You know, she did not go to Parliament. She just went around it and joined Trump's bombing missions. So yeah, and at that moment, you know, Obama was just left, you know, looking like an idiot, because, you know, if you don't have the British with you, you are really out on your own. And then Putin, you know, jumped in to help him out. Oh, look, hey, we'll cobble together a face-saving formula, and you know, and then, but as you say, what did he do? Obama immediately betrayed him in Ukraine. You know, and directly, he actually lied to the Russians because the Russians asked him, "Will you support this new arrangement that's between Yanukovych and the opposition?"
we'll have an election in December. Will you support this? Yep, we'll support it. And then next day they withdrew their support.
No, again, we're getting it's the same situation. Obama made a declaration of a red line, and so is now Biden. I mean, it's hard to take these people seriously. Now, what is the political issue here? George and I don't know. Okay, we're not gadflies at Foggy Bottom or in the National Security Council. However, there is this growing feeling that they need a win. They need a win. Okay. I mean, of all places to try to find a win, that's the last place you want to go. The last place you want to go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it is a stranger, because I mean, you would have thought an easy win would be returning to the JCPOA with Iran, but of course they're afraid of that, because that might not be counted as a win. Because there's going to be so many Democrats who are going to be opposed to that. All the Chuck Schumers, they're not going to be happy with the Biden administration returning to the JCPOA, which they hated when Obama signed on to it. So that's why they haven't done anything. So that's not going to be a foreign policy win for him. So this is a very, very strange kind of place to seek out a foreign policy win. Anyway, we have a super chat from Anton K. Thank you so much, Anton. And he says, Roger Stone told Tucker he pretty much got into politics because he thought Nixon was cheated in 1960. I mean, I guess that was in the long form of the interview.
Yeah, the Tucker Carlson Today program.
Tucker Carlson Today, because that lasts for about an hour. Well, congratulations, Anton, that you had access to that whole. Yeah, I'd love to know how you can do that, because I mean, I don't particularly want to subscribe to Fox. Is it Fox Nation or Fox Nation? Because I'd be signing on to a whole lot of nonsense, like the demented ravings of what's the name of the one that we're always ranting and raving on Afghanistan and everything else.
What's her name?
Lara Logan. Lara Logan.
Oh, no,
Lara Logan, and
I never know if she's on her meds or off her meds. I can't.
Yeah, and then the other one, the
Keith said.
Yeah, Keith Heskett, yeah, and all the rest of them, and Tammy Bruce, and all. I just don't want to pay for all of that. So but I do want to watch these interviews, because these Tucker Carlson interviews must be really interesting, and plus the Tucker Carlson documentaries. So I'd love to know how one can do that without paying the subscription. And besides, I can't even get it here in Hungary.
Every once in a while, I get a bootleg version on YouTube before they figure out to take it off. That's how I saw Patriot Purge. But going back to Roger Stone, he said something in the short version that we saw on Tucker's evening program, is that he was being somehow convinced to go to the Capitol on January 6th. I mean, I'd like to know a whole lot more about that.
That's right. Yeah. Very, very interesting. Exactly. He said he got a telephone call from Secret Service people, said, hey, can we escort you to the Capitol? Really? They go to all the trouble of trying to escort him to the Capitol. And so, and again, as he said, I'm not a fool. And then I straight away smelled that this was a setup. Okay. And he said, I never actually even went to the Capitol that day.
Okay, everybody, we always take Roger Stone's words with a grain of salt. He is a political operator. He is prone to exaggeration and hyperbole. It doesn't mean you should violate his civil rights, but I mean, if he's saying what he's saying is true, then one conclusion you can draw is that Trump's Secret Service had gone rogue.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good point. That's a very good point. But it was clear that there were many people there on that day who were aware that this was a kind of a false flag operation, because remember, there's the footage of Alex Jones, pleading with people, don't go into the Capitol, that's what they want you to do, don't do this. So Alex Jones realized that something was going on here, that this was a false flag operation. So, and I think Jones and Stone, I think, are very close. So I think, I think they were both essentially saying, yeah, this is that there's something definitely very wrong here. These are not, Trump people. These are not MAGA people who are actually running this operation. Somebody else is running it with a very different agenda.
The irony of ironies, George, is that you and I did a separate podcast of, the alternative Mueller report coming out. I mean,
right.
going, this, bouncing the rubble, looking for something is it, and then we have this,
yes.
Another insight, a possible insight of the conspiracy of January 6th. I mean, one is screaming to be told, and the other one is just, they keep swinging it around like a dead cat to see what they can hit. Okay, for me, that's probably the most mind-blowing thing, is that one narrative is completely a fable, and I'm being charitable, and another one is a story that is screaming to be told.
That's right. That's right. Well, apparently, it seems like there's going to be it's possible that a certain 3 hours of footage will be released sometime in the near future, because kind of a group of media organizations have sued the government demanding release of this footage. Now, the government really doesn't want to release any footage at all other than these little 90-second excerpts, but this is going to be 3 hours of footage, and particularly it will pertain to the violence, the violence that I think the police wielded against the rioters, and which led to the death of this woman. That remember, the DC examiner said, "Oh, she died of an overdose," but it's clear that there was something a lot worse that was going on there. So if this 3 hours is going to be footage, because there was this attorney, I think he was on Tucker Carlson the other day, this attorney who says he's seen this footage. He said this footage will be absolutely an eye-opener. So, and this is, I mean, if it was just the defense attorneys who wanted this release, the government would say, ignore them. But now you've got the media involved, and the media have themselves sued the government for the release of this footage. That could be quite interesting. And, it's not so easy to tell the media, no, we can't possibly release any of this. 14,000 hours of footage. None of it has been released other than these little 90-second clips that the government thinks it strengthens its case. So that's going to be very interesting if we do get to see this footage.
Yeah, and what will be really interesting is that you'll have the same usual suspects at CNN and MSNBC. See, it proves our point. Don't believe your lying eyes. Okay, just watch. Okay, watch.
And so we have another super chat from Spectre in the Air. Thank you so much, Spectre. Always very generous. It says, how many January 6 people are still in jail charged with insurrection? None with insurrection. And it says Dems and deep state evil. But that's the interesting thing. I mean, the media will continue to refer to, insurrection. The Democrats, insurrection. Nobody's been charged with an insurrection. And it's why, even the Chalupa guy, who's been sentenced to a ridiculous, 3.5 years in prison, just because, he obviously had mental health issues, walking around half naked, middle of January. But even he wasn't charged with insurrection, because it's an absolutely ridiculous charge. But they still want to maintain that fable, the insurrection. And this January the 6th committee, it's obviously not doing anything. It's not doing. Why isn't this committee? If he wants to get to the bottom of it, why isn't it suing the government and say, hey, we want to see this footage? We want to find out what happened. So, all they're doing is endlessly, issuing these subpoenas to people close to Trump. That's all they're doing. They haven't had any hearings. So what other than this lachrymose cops feeling sorry for themselves?
Yeah, what's one of the outcomes is that you had the Capitol Police, basically revealing their dereliction of duty, and then you gave them more money. Can someone explain that to me?
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right. They want more money. They clearly, absolutely, bungled this, and And here are, they're holding the, this January the 6th committee, and again, they always get these favorable write-ups. They want to get to the bottom of what happened for January 6th. Well, it's not hard to get to the bottom of it. I mean, just let's see this footage. It's there. You have subpoena powers. Why don't you subpoena this footage, and then we'll be able to see what went on. No, let's just go after Bannon. Let's go after Roger Stone.
What about Christopher Wray? How many of your agents were involved in those
Exactly.
events? Okay?
Exactly.
How many of your agents? How many people working for you? How many people on your payroll?
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And what did you know before?
Exactly.
Okay, and
Right.
explain your activity, what you
Right.
did, why you didn't do certain things, why
Right.
didn't you inform people?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it could all actually be resolved in about a 2-hour conversation
Yes.
in public with Christopher Wray. Okay,
That's right.
then demand his resignation.
Yeah, that's right. It's very interesting how you get this Christopher Wray, because remember he was testifying before the Senate, and I think Amy Klobuchar asked him, I think, she didn't really mean very much by it, but I think she just asked, well, how much advanced knowledge did you have about this? And boy, did he immediately duck the question. I mean, I think that's what started a lot of this investigation by Revolver News, because when she asked a question, just like how much advanced knowledge did you have? He was really, blah, 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 did not answer that question, which again made you think, well, he obviously had extensive knowledge of these events. So, these people are so, they love dissimulating. Remember James Comey? I mean, the master of dissimulation. You come along, you lie when you can get away with it. When you can't get away with it, then you just don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, amazing. You're head of the FBI, and apparently you don't know anything.
That's what we got from him. Right. I mean, did you learn anything that you about your tenure at the FBI? Okay. Do you remember any of it?
No, I don't remember.
Amnesia, just,
exactly. Yeah.
Sleepwalking.
I mean,
but you do remember memorializing a conversation with the President of the United States immediately in a government car, on a government laptop, and you wrote it down. You remember that?
I remember, exactly. But it's amazing. I mean, again, our elites. I mean, how you you punch your ticket and you move to the top. This Comey's kind of rise to these dazzling heights. He's always had senior positions. Now he does have an advantage. I mean, he's 6'8". Now it's a fact that people who are 6'8" usually get big jobs. I mean, there's something about height that people feel safe.
Tall people make more money.
Yeah, exactly. There's a great correlation between height and money. I mean, it's like, because there's some evolutionary thing in the human mind. People feel safe with somebody who's tall.
Just speaking of which, I remember when it was in the very earliest days of the Trump administration, and he was meeting some of the agencies and all that, and old Jimbo Comey, he was in the corner hiding. Okay. And then he pointed him out. Go on up here, and this towering figure. I'm sure Trump will tell us one day what because they whispered in each other's ears.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Anyway, we have another super chat from our friend Spectre in the air. Thank you so much, Spectre. Says, what do you think of Bannon? Brilliant, but a bit nuts. Think his political instincts are very good. Just curious. It's a very good question. I mean, Bannon, I think, is a brilliant individual. But you always wonder what his agenda is. I mean, he's and so you always want to be just a bit careful, to how far you want to follow Bannon. I think he's nuts on the subject of China. I'm no great fan of China, but he seems really nuts on the subject of that. Anyway, what do you think, Peter?
I think it'll surprise a lot of people. He kind of reminds me very much of Vladimir Lenin. Why? Because Lenin's ideology was, I don't know, he understood the trappings of Marxism, okay, and then there was kind of, to use a modern phrase, kind of Russian features to it, but he was mediocre in that sense. but he understood how power worked, and he was a brilliant tactician.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's what Bannon's like. When he goes at length on certain things, I think you're nuts. Okay, I mean, really. But how to affect political change and to change narratives and to keep and catch people off guard. He's really good at that. He's really, I mean, almost like an evil genius. Okay, so as a thinker, I don't think much of his thinking, but if I were in a political duel with him, I think I would just surrender in advance. Okay.
No, I think that's a very good analogy, that because he does understand power, he understands political tactics, and he has a strangely enough, as you said with Lenin, he has almost a dispassionate admiration for political ruthlessness, even when it's being wielded against him. So I mean, it's like, you know, I think he's always expressed his admiration for Pelosi. You think, you know, somebody, you know, with his ideology might hate Pelosi, but he always kind of expresses admiration because Pelosi is so ruthless and so absolutely determined to win. I mean, his view is, you know, why can't the people on our side be a little bit more like Pelosi? And I think that's I think with him, and that's genuine with him, because he always says, I know, my fans are not going to like this. But, you know, Pelosi is really playing her hand very, very smartly. And I think that's, and I think it goes to your point, is that he understands power, he understands political tactics, and he's ruthless when he needs to be. I mean, that's what he just basically says. If you're going to win, you have to, you know, be absolutely ruthless.
Take a look at the documentary he made on Sarah Palin. I'm no fan of Sarah Palin whatsoever. I mean, she, for good reason, is the butt of so many jokes. However, he watched her on the McCain campaign, and he saw absolutely brilliant, unintentional, by accident. I mean, Sarah Palin, in my mind, is kind of like a Chauncey Gardner character. Okay, I mean, Chauncey Gardner he would say things, and it was interpreted completely different than the way it was delivered. But I mean, but there's some genius in that. Okay, I mean, she's a precursor to Trump by just saying how working people, middle-class people think about the elites. She was one of the first to do it.
Yes.
Okay. Because she wasn't of a political pedigree. She didn't know what she was supposed to do, how to act, you know, and how, talking to these highfalutin, fancy East Coast journalists and all of that. You know, what magazines do you get your news from? Well, she's an average person. Most people don't have time to read magazines. Okay.
Exactly. No, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. No, I think that's true. I think that she did. I mean, I think in 2008, she was the star of that campaign. No question. You know, the McCain people, of course, all turned on her and tried to make out that, we lost only because of her. On the contrary, I think he was heading for an absolute, landslide defeat, and that she rescued his campaign. She's the one who actually made it a lot closer in the end than I think it seemed earlier on.
And what happened is that it wasn't Sarah Palin as a person, but it was Sarah Palin in her words, in her worldview, that opened up a lane that no one thought was there. And then Trump conquered that lane. Okay.
Right. Yeah. No, that's right. I think it's a very good point. I never understood why after 2008, she gave up the governorship, because if she'd stayed as governor, that would have set her up very nicely for at least for 2012. But I think because she gave up that position, she really just wasn't in the running for 2012. And I don't even understand what happened there, because it just didn't look good for her just to in the middle of her term just to resign.
I hate to say it, George, and I don't have the fact. I can't marshal any facts right now. But unfortunately, I think when you get into that ring of political environment, you're looking to cash in.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah,
I think too. That's what she was aiming for, cashing in.
Yeah,
and I'm sure she felt very, very bruised by the McCain people. Okay,
Yes.
and all of the usual losers in the Republican Party.
That's right. Exactly. I mean, McCain, I mean, it was just such an abysmal campaign. I mean, here's a person who, who was awful. I mean, awful in every possible way. The one thing you could do is to go after Obama. I mean, just attack Obama. Just say this is a person, a neophyte. He has a very strange background. We really know almost nothing at all about him. Just came out of nowhere. And then he even dropped the ball on that one. Remember when some woman asked a question about I think he's a Muslim, and he just sort of grabbed the microphone from her. That's a McCain supporter, and you that's how you behave with one of your supporters. Besides, I mean, that issue. I mean, Obama said he wasn't a Muslim. Okay, fine. But it's a legitimate issue. I mean, the guy spent so many years in Indonesia. His stepfather was a Muslim. His father, I think, was a Muslim as well. I mean, admittedly, he didn't have anything to do with his father, but nonetheless, those were legitimate issues. And if you've got nothing else, I mean, McCain, I mean, which is other than going to war with Putin, you grab whatever you can, which is you attack Obama.
The problem with McCain is that he felt he deserved it.
Yes.
He just couldn't understand why people didn't believe that he deserved it.
Right.
Okay. I mean, and John McCain is attached to so many catastrophes. I mean, it's really amazing. Okay.
Right.
And this will bruise a few people, but Trump had it absolutely right. He wasn't a hero.
Right.
Okay. He wasn't.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
We have this really kind of broad and loose definition of what being a hero is.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That was the thing. What he was a survivor. That's a different issue. I mean, he's a survivor. Well, okay, many people are survivors. I mean, you're held in captivity, you survive, but that's not what a hero is. A hero is someone who goes in, sacrifices his own life, takes risks on behalf of others. But now, again, with the kind of great inflation, anybody at all who served in the armed forces is deemed a hero. Everybody gets a medal for something or other. So now you get, every officer has a kind of a fruit salad on his chest. So, but you're not a hero until you've actually done something that is heroic, which is, you've risked your life on behalf of others. McCain never did that.
Going back to Ben, and one of the things that what I think is very interesting, he's a relatively wealthy man. I mean, he's done well for himself financially. I mean, he has worked on Wall Street.
Yes.
He's been involved in some very successful media operations.
Yes.
But you look at him, it's the same scruffy coat, the messed up, kind of like the George look. But I mean, I find that kind of attractive because he's in it for the game. He's in it for that's what gets him. Okay, it's all of these other things. Okay, they're all nice and fine, but that's not what he's about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
I Unlike Joe Biden, that always wants to be, be a VIP, the limousine, the latte, and never can get enough, and enough of material. Nothing here, nothing here. Just stuff.
No, that's a very good point. Because he has made a lot of money. He worked at Goldman Sachs, and he had all these media operations. I mean, he was at Breitbart. But yeah, he's very, when you see him, he's always, never had a haircut. He's completely unshaven, like he hasn't shaven in about, I don't know how many days. Always wearing that scruffy denim jacket. He even showed up in court dressed like that. So you're right. I mean, this is that's part of his allure, that he's really interested in politics. I mean, this is what he lives for.
That's why I think Vladimir Lenin is a really good analog.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think it's right.
Lenin had contempt for the bourgeois lifestyle and the elite. Okay.
Yeah.
Absolute contempt.
Yes. I think so. No, I think it's a very good analogy. I mean, he's somebody who is very radical, but he's also now become very influential. This new show of his, I mean, when he got the can from the Trump administration, I mean, it looked for a while as if he's done. You know, he's finished because Breitbart parted company with him. You know, that the Mercer family, they kind of disowned him. And then boom, he kind of bounces back, starts this new podcast, this War Room. And it obviously worked his way back into Trump's good favor. So I think they're very close and talk all the time. And this new show, this podcast of it, is very successful. So much so the media are quite obsessed with it. I mean, there've been so many media profiles about Bannon's poisonous influence. You know, Bannon's mendacity. That means he's hurting. He's having an influence. So it's quite a transformation.
Well, I mean, but what he does is, and that's one of the things that I find very attractive about him. I follow him very, very closely, and in his type, he's like a politics of motion, okay, of action. That's what he's about, okay. And he's not stationary, and that's what most politicians do. They stake something, and
Right.
then they move their axes to adjust and to appease and all
Yes.
that. And he's like a bowling ball. He just like knock all down the pins and see what's left, okay? And let's do it over and over again.
So we have another super chat from our friend Spectre in the air. Thank you again so much, Spectre. And it says some people think that McCain caused the Forrestal fire and Admiral Stockdale wanted McCain court-martialed. And then it says Bannon looks like he has whiskey for breakfast. He does a little bit. That's an interesting story. I mean, I've read about that story, about that fire, and I don't know, you know, enough to say whether, you know, how true it is and so on. I mean, if true, obviously it's an absolutely shocking dereliction of duty and a shocking cover-up. You know, that nothing happened to him, but you know, his father was a very big figure in the Navy, and it's plausible that there was a cover-up in order to save him.
It seems to me, because his father was such a powerful person in the Navy, is that giving your, you know, nepotism, but making your son an admiral, I don't think would have been really a tall order, okay,
Right.
George? And it seems to me, if this story is true, George and I are careful here, if this story is true, is that even his father couldn't agree that, you know, this such a, if it's true, it's such a dereliction of duty.
Yes.
And I mean, the loss of life and property, I mean, that ship was in big danger, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think many people died. I think, you know, I can't remember the number, but it was something like more than 100 people, I think, died. I mean, it was an absolutely shocking episode. But you know, he did have a reputation for carelessness. Remember, he crashed a number of planes. You know, planes, you know, they're very expensive. You can't have, you know, your pilots crashing, these planes, you know, while you're testing them out. So he did have a very bad reputation in terms of his, his military prowess. And to be honest, getting shot down by the North Vietnamese is also not a great testament to your skills. I mean, you know, their air defense system was fairly rudimentary. I mean, I think, U.S. planes should have been able to avoid getting shot down by North Vietnamese air defense system. So, but the story of that ship is quite shocking, and there is still the story, but which is part of it. He was shipped out. You know, and then there's a question, well, why did they do it? Because they were afraid that the rest of the crew were going to turn on him and lynch him. I mean, if they thought that he was responsible for this this fire. So it's interesting that they kind of quickly flew him out to Saigon, so that, while this fire was still raging.
There has to be a reason why, at the end of the day, he wasn't given that final push up into the hierarchy. And it has to be something so detrimental, and just you just couldn't get your peers to agree. Just on this one, we just can't do it on this one. Okay.
Yes.
Because his father was very powerful man.
Oh yeah, very, very, very. Absolutely. I mean, so it's a. But it is a shocking story. Again, we don't know what true it is, but people can read about it. On the internet, there are very long, detailed accounts of it, and you can take them for what it's worth. We have another super chat from our friend Kevin Dorr. Again, thank you so much, Kevin. And he says the McCain people are now hosting MSNBC shows and Lincoln Project pervs.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed I voted for the political fraud. I think a lot of people are embarrassed for having voted for John McCain. And understand, I couldn't bring myself to support McCain in 2008. I mean, I think that, I still, prefer Obama. I mean, Obama was so fortunate that, he was up against Hillary Clinton in 2008, and then John Edwards, who kind of imploded. And then in the general election, he's up against John McCain. I mean, so, the gods smiled on him, just as the gods smiled on him, how he got to the Senate, because, in both cases, both in winning the Democratic primary and in the general election, it was a sexual scandal that defeated his opponent. So the gods really smiled. And then, of course, in 2012, when he was up for re-election, he was up against Richie Rich, which is Mitt Romney, and everybody hates Mitt Romney. I mean, there's just something about him that really turns everyone off. So he's had a wonderfully fortunate political career.
And here's John McCain that had a career in the Senate, married an extremely wealthy woman, very wealthy, and so everything was served up to him. And then it's very revealing that when the financial crisis started in the waning days of the Bush administration, McCain panicked. He completely cracked.
Yes,
he cracked. And Larry Summers over at the Treasury, they were giving Obama and McCain equal information about it because they don't know which guy's going to win. Okay, the polls are tight. And so they're giving, they're telling whoever's going to be in the Oval Office, this is how this is transpiring. And then the Bush people, Republican, realized talking to Obama and his crew, they kind of get it, okay? Because McCain's out to lunch.
Right.
The economy is cratering.
Yes. Suspension
of campaign, and then, all this stuff. And Obama's people just played it cool. When they went in, they met, they suspended the campaign. They went in to talk to George W. Bush, and McCain folded. And the entire room knew it. And when the entire room knew it, the entire media knew it, okay? And people were taking sides already by then.
No, that's right. It was an amazing thing. Again, McCain panicked. There was an opening for him. And there it was. He just they couldn't handle it, which again goes to his temperament, and that again shows that at the crucial moments he lacks judgment and he lacks fortitude. I mean, he just wasn't up to the job. But it was always bizarre that why somebody as erratic as he was should have thrust himself forward as a presidential nominee. I mean, it's a kind of a mystery of American politics when people who are so manifestly unsuitable for that job kind of push themselves forward. And sometimes I say, look, Bob Dole, he was somebody who was a glad hander. He was somebody who was very good in Congress, lining up votes and so on. Why would he think that that could translate into being a national figure when you don't have an appealing personality?
It was his turn.
It's his turn, and that was it. And he said, "My turn." I mean, with his customary snarl. But sometimes it works. I mean, if you looked at Biden, this was Biden's third attempt to run for the presidency. His two previous attempts ended in complete fiasco. And everyone assumed that this attempt would also end in fiasco. And it did indeed start off as a total fiasco, finishing, fourth in New Hampshire, fifth in Iowa, fifth in Nevada. And then suddenly his campaign was rescued. But again, you thought that Biden is manifestly unsuitable as any kind of a leader. I mean, that's just not what he was. I mean,
but the interesting things is that at the end of the day, the Republican Party just, they would never say it publicly, but the leadership, the donors, they soured on McCain and on
Yes.
Palin, okay? And then on Mitt Romney, they held their nose too, okay? And then the other way around is that after when it came up to the South Carolina primary, few people made a few calls, George, okay? And all of a sudden, everybody drops out, okay?
Right.
And then he's anointed. It wasn't the voters that did it.
Right.
He was anointed by the party. See, the party does matter. The Republican Party, just they weren't McCainiacs, okay?
Right.
And Mitt Romney, one of the least likable human beings that have ever graced the earth, okay? And then Joe Biden, again, completely unsuited, mediocre senator at best, on the wrong side of history, always.
Right, yeah.
But the party did it.
Yes, yeah, no, that's right. So Kevin Dorr says McCain was flown out to the Philippines, and then he went to Paris without permission before they were sure the ship could be saved. Yeah, I think something like that. I mean, I've forgotten the exact timeline, but I remember he was flown out, and then he did something like, just it sounded like he just went absent without leave. But again, because of his father, he managed to get away with this. Anyway, this Anton K, another super chat. Thank you so much, Anton. It says, if you go to tuckercarlson.com, you should be able to sign up for a few months of Fox Nation for free. Well, I think I think it's probably for Peter and me. I mean, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in Russia, and it doesn't work in Hungary. They say,
I tried.
I tried that as well. But then he says to bypass regional restrictions, you can try a VPN.
And I'm thinking about, but George has a point here. I mean, I would like to see Tucker's documentaries, and I'd like to see the day program that he does in his own house, by the way, guys.
Right.
I'm not into the plaid shirt thing. That's not my style, obviously. But to pay that money for Fox Nation, that's the only thing I want to watch. I want to watch Laura Logan, off her meds. That's what it should be called. Laura Logan off her meds.
But even that was she calls her show Lara Logan Has No Agenda. The one thing you have to say about Lara Logan, she has an agenda. I mean, it's like Lara Logan has no agenda. Everything you say, you're ranting and raving, we need to go back into Afghanistan. And then what was it the other day, it caught people's attention. She likened Fauci to Mengele. It's like, these are all, you see, when you say things like that, obviously we're no fans of Fauci, but when you go that extra mile and start bringing up Mengele, you've lost any credibility. No one's going to take you seriously when you do that.
People try to, I think I told you, I talked to a graduate student friend of mine after a long, very long hiatus, and talking about the media and all that. And I said, I like to watch Tucker. And he was like kind of shocked. And I said, well, it's the only thing on Fox that I actually like to watch. Okay. Gutfeld, I'll watch the monologue. Okay. Just because he's such a quirky guy. Okay. But other than that, I have no interest at all in Fox News at all. Okay. Matter of fact, they still think Ronald Reagan's alive. Okay, that's their problem.
That's right. That's right. Anyway, we have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It says, what's your opinion of Henry Wallace and Alger Hiss? Well, that's going back a ways. It was an interesting times. But of course, Alger Hiss is kind of the interesting case. There were clearly people working in the U.S. government who were obviously they were essentially agents of Moscow. There were even more important people than Alger Hiss. There was Harry Dexter White. He was instrumental in creating the IMF. But of course, in the case of Hiss, of course, that it launched the career of Richard Nixon, and in a way, Hiss is now famous for helped Richard Nixon's career because essentially he was the one who actually doggedly pursued the Hiss case. He actually believed Whittaker Chambers's accusations, and nobody didn't, because Chambers just looked like a shambles of a man. Hiss was, handsome, debonair, a very waspy looking guy. And so, you put this guy up against Hiss. Well, of course, Hiss is the one that's credible. Nixon didn't buy it. He actually believed Chambers. And so, yeah, that brought out Hiss. Henry Wallace, again, interesting figure, but he was FDR's vice president for, again, was it 3 terms? I mean, it was right at the end when FDR dumped him and picked Truman. It would very, very interesting. What would have happened had it not been Truman who was elected, and Wallace had stayed on and become president in 45.
If you really want to know what could have been, Oliver Stone and his colleague, it's been Peter Kuzak, many times been on Crosstalk. They have a book, and it's turned into a documentary series, The Untold History of America or the United States. And the first chapter is on Henry Wallace, and you ought to give it a read, okay? Now, both of them kind of put Henry Wallace on a pedestal, a little bit too much for me. I mean, these are politicians, but they believe that the Cold War could have been actually avoided, largely avoided, if Henry Wallace had been able, because if Truman hadn't replaced him, we could have had a very, very different form. Could have, very hypothetical. Okay, right. That's basically, you get a few beers out, and you talk about what could have been. Okay, yeah. I usually don't do that, but they make a compelling case. Okay, and it's worth reading.
No, I think that's a very interesting case. But again, I mean, it's Wallace did run in 1948 as an independent candidate. And but didn't at all fare well, so he really didn't have much of a following nationally. That was a kind of an interesting election, the 48 election, because of course there was a 3-way split among the Democrats. You had Henry Wallace on the left, and then you had Strom Thurmond on the right, the Dixiecrat, and then Truman in the middle, and Truman still managed to beat the Republican standard bearer Dewey. I mean, that was the famous, with the famous headline, Dewey defeats Truman. But Dewey was the classic, he was a sort of the Mitch McConnell of his era, utterly kind of, WASP establishment, out of touch with how ordinary people felt. And so even then, Truman, even though 3-way split with the Democratic vote, he still managed to beat Dewey.
But what's very interesting is that one of the most popular people in American history, Dwight D. Eisenhower, it took someone of his mettle and of his character to actually rehabilitate the Republicans, because people still remembered Herbert Hoover, okay, right. And the Depression. It was that was like still yesterday for everybody, okay.
Right.
And then when you had someone like, I mean, it could have. When you have to think of the times, it took someone of the stature of Eisenhower to bring the Republican Party back to life. Yes. Okay?
Yes.
And from what we know about Dwight D. Eisenhower's entire history, he wasn't really political one way or another. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I mean, his reasoning will, we can read about it, but I mean, I can't think of any other Republican, George, that could have pulled it off.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think so too. And as he was, he had kind of, the gravitas. He had been the figure in the war. But he was very, very smart. People laughed at him. They just assumed, he's kind of a country bumpkin. Very, very smart, and fairly effective president. I mean, no one said that he was incompetent. He was a strong, effective presidency, in which when he needed to, he got tough with his allies. I mean, he rubbed the noses of the British and French. Basically said, hey, you are our junior partner. You do as we say. We don't just over Suez. And he played his hand ruthlessly. And even with Israel, I mean, this is the one of a few presidents who actually got tough with Israel and demanded that Israel withdraw its forces from Sinai, but double quick. And Israel, quickly succumbed. They realized Eisenhower wasn't joking.
it's really interesting how our popular histories of presidents. Okay, I mean, George and I have talked a lot about the Nixon presidency, which I think is very misunderstood. The Eisenhower presidency. They have this image of an aging general that's in politics. The image of him playing golf. That's what they love to do. He's always golfing. He's always golfing and all that. But I mean, if you think about the political, not the military, but the political leadership that was necessary for the Allied war against Nazi Germany, that was no small feat. Everybody, because you have people like de Gaulle, very, very difficult to deal with. You have General Montgomery that had an ego that went from here to the moon and back. Right. Okay, and then you have George Patton, which is a loose gun. I mean, he had to deal with a lot of things. And then you have FDR. Playing one shenanigan after another, right. and then then you have George C. Marshall, which he again was a very slick political operator. Okay, right. So I mean, and you have to remember, Eisenhower had left the military. Technically, he had already left, and he was brought back in, and so he proved his mettle, and a very, very smart guy. He just wasn't a flamboyant person because he was from Kansas. Everybody, that's the way you are.
But you're right, it's not flamboyant, but it's a kind of an interesting that Patton had once been senior to him. I mean, but Patton basically was erratic, and so it wasn't surprising that Eisenhower kind of jumped ahead of him and became senior to him. But Eisenhower, he saved Patton. I mean, in that that great movie with George C. Scott and Patton, when he made that huge formal apology, he had to do that. I mean, that was basically Eisenhower arranged that this is the only way you can actually save your command. You make this huge apology, because Marshall wanted him out. Marshall just wanted Patton gone. Because it wasn't just one soldier. I mean, there have been a number of incidents when he had slapped soldiers. The problem was with this was the one soldier who actually filed a complaint. The others, they just let it go, but this one filed the complaint. So that was really problematic, and it was humiliating for Patton to do that, but that saved his career. And so that means he retained his command.
I'm pretty sure that Bradley was senior too to Eisenhower.
By then, he was back.
And then we had the so-called Battle of the Bulge. He took Bradley's army away from him. He said, I have to give it to someone. I mean, here are these guys. I mean, they came all up together, and and here's Ike, making these very significant decisions. Okay, he could have gotten rid of Patton in a snap, and when Bradley, no one said no to Bradley. Okay, except for he couldn't say no to Ike.
That's right.
It's amazing guy. I mean, I am a very big supporter of him, and it was the country needed someone like him at the time. Right. Okay, so and of course he allowed Dick Nixon to vault onto the national scene. Historians will judge.
That's right. So Jonathan corrects me. He says that Henry Wallace was VP from 40 to 44. John Nance Garner was FDR's VP for his first 2 terms.
That's why we have smart people on our podcast.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that correction. That was I did think, even as I was saying it, that I don't think Wallace was VP for 3 terms. So I thought it was wrong, but I blanked out as to his earlier VP.
But it really showed how because we always associate FDR with the New Deal, but the real disciples of the New Deal was more like his last vice president before Truman. Okay, and so this is the growing divisions within the party, and everybody knew. I mean, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have Twitter, but the inner circle knew that there's no way that Roosevelt was going to make it through his 4th term. No way. That's right.
And it was kind of a disgrace that this was kept secret. I mean, that he ran for re-election in 44 when there was no way in the world that he was going to make it through. I mean, he was there within a few months. So
he didn't even campaign.
Exactly. That was, I mean, they kept these things secret. Like all these things were just kept secret. I mean, JFK's health was kept secret. But you know, but FDR, I mean, this is in the middle of a war, and they just kept secret the seriousness of his health condition. So anyway, we have another super chat from Jay Gold, 1776. Thank you so very much, Jay. He says, thoughts on MacArthur versus Eisenhower rivalry. Ike was MacArthur's aide for a while. Right. Yeah, well, that's again very interesting. I think MacArthur is generally believed to be a much more brilliant, you know, tactically and strategically than Eisenhower. But you know, there was something about him, you know, much as a Patton, he was kind of erratic. I mean, you really don't go against the president. I mean, if you know, the president tells you that you don't do something, and then you do it, I mean, you know, you really, the president, no other choice but to fire you. And that's what, you know, and that's what Truman was supposed to do with MacArthur. And MacArthur openly criticized the president. I mean, so, you know, Eisenhower would never have made that mistake.
It's interesting too, because when you had the bonus army that was petitioning to have their, because in the First World War, soldiers that were veterans were promised a bonus, okay? And when the Depression hit, they said, well, no, it's a little, I think it was supposed to be paid out in 45 or something like that. But so it was like in 1932, and they're saying, no, we want the bonus now. Right. Who, and you had people, you know, this is a very scary time. This is like a billion times worse than January 6th, everybody, okay? Okay, they didn't breach the Capitol, but right. I mean, they had encampments. It was a lot of people. Who put it down? General Douglas MacArthur and his aide, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a very good point. But it's funny because then people assume that MacArthur himself would have a big political future. Because remember, after his dismissal, he addressed the joint session of Congress. That's a big deal, you know, a general addressing a joint session of Congress. Yeah, and I thought, but this is obviously a launching of a presidential career. It didn't happen. So it's again, you know, he didn't have that the presidential mettle that you know.
But he was getting pretty on in age, okay? I mean, some of the stuff that I've read about him is very interesting. I mean, he's very much a man of the 19th century, George. Even the way he talked and the way he wrote, he was a very different time. And critics of MacArthur claim, and I probably with good reason, is that he had no idea what it was like to live in the United States. He'd lived almost all his life abroad.
Right. Yes, no, I think that's a very good point. No, but I think that, you know, ultimately, you know, he didn't have the judgment that you would need to be a president, and I think that he showed that he just lacked the judgment, you know, to win an election. I mean, Eisenhower had judgment. I mean, you know, people assume that, oh, now the Republicans are in, they're going to, you know, pursue a kind of a warlike policy towards the Soviet Union. Eisenhower, you know, he didn't do it. I mean, you know, there's a lot of loose talk about liberation, rollback. He's going to use nuclear weapons to end the Korean War. It never happened. Anyway, we have a super chat from Darren Levy. It says, any opinion of Smedley Butler? Do you have any opinion of Smedley Butler?
Yeah, war is a racket.
That's the one, exactly. The war is a racket. Great quote.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really interesting is that he could have invented antiwar.com. Okay, I mean, that's the spirit of antiwar.com.
Right.
But I mean, he was. They tried to recruit him into a military coup. And quite extensive contacts were being made, and at the end of the day, he's like, "Whoa, I'm against these imperial war." I mean, he used language about war that we use now. I think it really is extraordinary the way he talked in those days, because people revered the military, but he saw, you know, what they did in Latin America. What we came up with Banana Republic because of that. I mean, very interesting character. And once he started backing away, he disappeared. Okay.
Right. No,
he disappeared.
Yeah. But that thing about the war is a racket. I mean, it's very important to realize, you know, that, you know, essentially, you know, the people who actually serve in the military, they have no idea, you know, how they're being used. they don't have any, hostility, resentment against someone else, but they're used by politicians, and so, I think that's why it has such a big impact, that book of his. So yeah, I know it's kind of an interesting character. So anyway, we have another super chat from Spectre in the Air. Didn't both Patton and MacArthur want to go to the war with the USSR? Yeah, I think they both did, and Patton did. So they kind of created this fantasy, of if only we could have, well, we gave away Eastern Europe, particularly Patton seemed to think, oh, we kind of gave away Eastern Europe to Stalin. If only we pushed on, we could have pushed, we could have, brushed aside the USSR. They don't seem to realize that, there were wartime agreements. I mean, that all of these things had been decided upon, and there was nothing, whatever you could do. I mean, Stalin was playing for keeps. I mean, when he moved to Romania and Bulgaria in 1944, and then with into Hungary and so on. So the whole idea, if only we'd have pushed forward and we could have defeated the USSR, it couldn't happen simply because wartime agreements. And the reason they had the wartime agreements is that the Western powers, they badly needed the USSR.
I think it's a lot less. I think this is kind of creating, kind of mythologizing these characters after the fact. I think if you go into more into the details, we've already mentioned it. I mean, he was almost relieved of his command. It was basically Eisenhower's call. Marshall was furious with Patton. Yeah. Again, it shows the strength of Eisenhower. He said, basically, I'm running operations here, right? Yes. Okay, then he stays. Right. But the point with Patton and the Soviets, it's more about his own glory, number one, and number two, yes, folks, it was imminently possible, given the troops and material and the location, distance, the U.S. could have taken Berlin. It's not impossible. It could have been done. But Eisenhower knew, first of all, agreements have been made. And number two, the cost in lives could have been horrendous. Right. Horrendous. And so that's why he said, so I think people, the George C. Scott film is a great film. I like it too. It was one of my childhood memories, okay? But I think we tend to mythologize a little bit about these things after the fact, because at the time, the Soviets were not our enemy, okay? They were our allies, okay? But what I think, Patton, because he had, the press had found out about his mishaps, okay? I mean, and that's one of the reasons why Marshall wanted him to go. We need this to be a popular war, everybody. And then Patton was saying, and I think in the back of his head is that if I can take Berlin, I can make amends, okay? And then I can be president of the United States, not Ike, because he didn't like Ike. He didn't like him at all.
Right. No, I think that's a very good point. They were, but it was the wartime agreements. And even if you take Berlin, you still have to adhere to the wartime agreement, which was there was going to a 4-power division of Berlin. So I mean, there was that had been at Yalta. They had already drawn up the zones of occupation. You couldn't go back on that, because then you are going to essentially go involve yourself in a war with the Soviet Union. Remember, this was Stalin's nightmare. Stalin was suspecting that the British and the Americans were actually going to double cross him, and so indeed to change sides and maybe use Hitler, the remnants of Hitler's forces against him. So Stalin was very worried about that. So therefore, any talk about, oh, we're just going to take this and we're going to deny the Soviets a zone of occupation in Germany, would have been a catastrophe.
But Stalin was right in the end, because after the partition of Germany and then the advent of West Germany, the Federal Republic, they became a member of NATO. So Stalin, he knew that he would betray the Soviet Union, would betray, but it was a matter of time. He was right.
Exactly, it was a matter of time. I mean, Hitler's people were just simply too unacceptable to sign any kind of agreement. You couldn't sign agreements with Himmler and Goering. You just had to move on to the next generation, kind of the ones who were serving Hitler and Goering, but they weren't in the command position.
And Albert Speer thought he was going to be the man, okay? Albert Speer is one of the most disgusting human beings of the 20th century. Right. He's a pathological liar, and he made a lot of money. He was a good Nazi. Remember that rhetoric?
Yeah.
He's the one that made amends. No, he's the one that wrote books to make money for himself.
Right.
He's just a totally disgusting human being. And the way he was venerated by Western media, disgusting.
Right. No, well, I agree with everything you say about him, but the veneration by the Western media is kind of understandable because he was right in the middle of the Third Reich. So when he wrote his book Inside the Third Reich, I was somebody who was directly there. There was and
he had time on his hands.
Yeah, time on his hands. But up until then, people were relying on nonsense written by William L. Shirer. Good book, entertaining book. He was a lively journalist, but it wasn't somebody who was directly involved in that. So Inside the Third Reich. I remember as a little small boy when he came out, it was a huge deal because wow, this is the person right next to Hitler who's written this kind of book about Inside the Third Reich. But it is kind of interesting how they treated him. Remember, he got 20 years. This is a guy who was Hitler's armaments minister, so he knew all about the slave labor. He used slave labor. God knows how many people whose deaths he was responsible for. But they wanted to have the good German, and same went for Baldur von Schirach, who was they were released at the same time in I think it was 66. I think they were released after 20 years. And Baldur von Schirach, he was Hitler. He was head of the Hitler Youth, and then became the Gauleiter of Austria. So he also was, kind of involved in other things. But but it was very much, we want to retain the idea that there was the sort of the good Germans, who kind of idealistic, they got themselves unfortunately involved with Hitler.
You're right. In the sense that I remember reading the book and was fascinated by it because we had The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William R.
Shirer. Right.
And great journalist, good writer. Okay, right. But it's just the kind of a first draft. Okay,
yes, exactly.
But to have someone in the beast of the belly like that was the selling point. This guy actually saw everything.
Right.
Okay,
exactly.
But it was very self-serving, and he lied about his own crimes. And there was a German journalist. It was a woman, I can't remember her name, but she did a very long kind of interview biography. Oh
yeah, Gita Sereni.
Yeah, but she good journalist, okay, and she found all the holes.
Yeah.
She found all of the holes in his story, and on top of it, his wife and children waited for him for 20 years, and by the end of his life, he was screwing around with other women.
Yes,
okay?
No, he's very funny because he kind of lived on for another 20 years afterwards. I think he died sometime in the mid 1980s, and so he led a pretty nice life. And the German media, they had and that's an interesting issue though. Because it brings up a fascinating question. You're right. He was treated very respectfully by the Western media. He would be giving interviews. I remember David Frost.
Well.
Yeah, and it's, and I think it's our perception of World War II is very different now from what it was then, and because at the time, a lot of people were fascinated by World War II. And they weren't thinking about things like Holocaust and all the horrific atrocities of the Nazis. The World War II was like, German armies. People were fascinated by all the brilliant generals and then Eisenhower and Montgomery. And I think people were. That was the perception of World War II at that time. And they were just fascinated by it.
And you have this issue, who wrote it? Fascinating Fascism. Who wrote that book? no. Anyway, it was a series of essays about how, Nazi regalia. There's a mystique.
Oh yeah,
and it's very seductive, and that was the whole point. It's very, very seductive.
Right.
Okay, and what Albert Speer, he wanted to put a good spin on something that is fundamentally wrong and bad and rotten. Okay, and that's my issue with him, because it was self-serving. It was self-serving to him in the end of the day, and I find that unconscionable.
But it's very funny because the idealistic Nazi, because I don't know whether you saw that film by remember that Marcel Ophuls, who made that movie. You remember Marcel Ophuls? He made those documentaries. He made one about the name escapes me. The one the Nazi who escaped and then lived in South America for many years. He was in
Bormann.
No, it wasn't Bormann, because he actually then eventually was extradited back to France.
Eichmann.
Well, it wasn't Eichmann. No, he was in France.
Which one was it?
I know. Somebody here will probably remember his name. It was called Hotel Klaus Barbie. Sorry, Klaus Barbie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
the third guy. Okay.
The third guy is Klaus Barbie. So because he was the Gestapo guy in France, he somehow escaped, and basically the Americans helped him escape. And then he lived in South America happily for something like 20 years, and then he was extradited back to France. So he made a whole documentary about this, and he was interviewing the American who interviewed Barbie in 1945, and then he wrote in his file, well, Barbie is, he's okay. He's just basically an idealistic Nazi. He wrote in this in this file, and then Ophuls asks him, what do you mean by that? What do you mean he's an idealistic Nazi? I don't know. I don't know what I meant by that. But it's interesting that at the time they were thinking, well, yeah, he's basically an idealistic Nazi. They didn't know what they meant. I think that he's basically a good guy was somehow led astray. Maybe there was a sort of a decent kind of Nazism that he tried to.
But don't you think the Cold War hysteria and the new Red Scare and that because it's kind of akin for me when I look at Eastern European regimes in the 20s and the 30s. They were horrific, George. They're awful places to live. Okay, right. I mean, they were just in many forms, but not exact duplicates. But they were reasonable templates for what happened in Nazi Germany and Austria. Okay, but then you have the Nazi experience. You have the invasion of Eastern Europe, the invasion of the Soviet Union conquering, defeating the Nazis, occupying Eastern Europe, and then. Now they're the captive nations, and it's just like, these are a lot more complicated places than you think, okay? And it just wipes away things, okay? The thing about Klaus Barbie is the whole history of the Vichy regime, and that's a fascinating thing, okay? And and how there's a guy named I have it behind me here, Russo, Russo. He's written a book called the Vichy Syndrome, and what he did was. He looked at how Vichy was, the narrative of Vichy at the end of the Second World War, all the way up to, I think at that time was like 1988 or something like, because that's when the Klaus Barbie thing was going on. I think that's how he starts his book. And it's really interesting, the narrative of Vichy, it's a new modern, it's a modern French version, it's a new European, there's a lot of stuff that, and Vichy propaganda was really, really interesting. And a lot of the people that worked in the Vichy regime were in national politics all the way into the 80s. Meet it all.
That's right. Well, that's right. But if you remember when Paul Johnson wrote his book, Modern Times, which is a very good book.
Great book.
But
guys, it's a conservative history. See, all 99% of histories are liberal histories. Paul Johnson, the way he goes after Franklin Roosevelt, it is raw.
That's right. Look, it's a great read. He has interesting things to say about everything. And but one of the things he said, he talked about Vichy, and he said that Vichy was an example of Franco-German cooperation that was to influence the Franco-German reconciliation after 1945. He said that the French and the Germans actually learned to quite like and respect each other. And then that was, basically laid the groundwork for the Franco-German cooperation after 45. It was an amazing take, but that's it. He said, it was Vichy. But incidentally, speaking of Vichy, the guy we're talking about, Eric Zemmour, he still says nice things about Pétain in particular. I don't know what he says about Laval, but I mean, the French have always had a kind of a soft spot for Pétain, because Pétain was the head of Vichy. I mean, he had been a World War I hero. You can't really attack Pétain without really attacking, the French effort in World War I. But he defends Pétain, and he says something that the French always insist on. Yes, okay, the foreign Jews who were in France were shipped off to Auschwitz, but we French, we saved the French Jews. I mean, I always hear this argument from the French. They always say that, yeah, okay, the foreign Jews, we didn't save them, but we saved we saved the French Jews. And he says this. This is Eric Zemmour says this, and Zemmour is, of course, himself a Jew. So it's interesting that suddenly this argument has come back.
But it really, Vichy, and I encourage people to look at it over the holidays if you have some downtime, and if a lockdown is coming towards you, take a look at the history of Vichy. That it is not resolved. It doesn't go away. I mean, it's 2021. We have a presidential candidate talking about Vichy still, and it is something that ties French people all up into knots.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But I think that's, again, I mean, it goes back to, the Marcel Ophuls. I mean, he was famous because he made that movie. His first documentary was The Sorrow and the Pity that he made in the 1960s. It was about Vichy. And that put pay to the whole mythology of the resistance, because the French and the Germans actually got on quite well. I mean, there wasn't, no one was revolting against German occupation.
French resistance, it's a myth.
Yeah.
It didn't happen.
There was just the goal. There was just the goal, and that's it. No one else.
Under French law, he was a traitor. Under French law, okay? I just wanted to throw in another little kink into all of this, everybody, because technically, when he escaped France, he was a deserter.
Yes. And it's very interesting, exactly, because during the Allied invasion in 1944, there wasn't even a kind of a French contingent. It's like you think, well, at least, here's the American contingent, the British contingent, and here's the French contingent. There wasn't even that.
There were more Canadians than French, okay? More Canadians. No, it was something that was really hotly debated. I mean, I wish we could see that in real time, because it was Churchill that was really pushing for, let de Gaulle liberate Paris and all that, and the Americans and the British like, oh, geez, and it was Churchill. He really, because you got to understand, everybody that was under Eisenhower, they all wanted the glory. This is a once in a lifetime thing, and then the scale of it, they all knew they were making history. Okay, they were in the middle of the greatest conflict in human history, and they all wanted to write their scripts. Okay, and then this tall, skinny guy, it's like, who's he? Okay, they made it. Okay.
Yeah. That's right. And de Gaulle never forgot that he was treated with disdain by the Americans. That rankled with him and was to influence his policy towards the United States in the 1960s. At that time, of course, the United States were very upset because he was basically just dumping dollars. Because they said, hey, these dollars aren't really worth anything. We want gold. And which of course then triggered America going off the gold standard. But de Gaulle never forgot that the way the Americans treated him in the war. So anyway, we have another super chat from our friend Spectre in the Air. Thank you so much, Spectre. It was very, very kind of you. And he says, thanks guys for a very informative chat. As always, your knowledge is wide ranging and deep. And then he talks about Merkel locking down unvaxxed. History repeating, sadly. Yeah, I mean,
I see the same meme. Yeah.
I have to say, it is very troubling when you have Germany and Austria kind of leading the pack with lockdowns and mandatory vaccination. And I have to say, this new the new government is going to come in. after Merkel. And I think they're going to be coming in next week. Very worse. I mean, they're really fanatics about lockdown. So it doesn't surprise me that the left is generally now more authoritarian and more in favor of locking everyone up than ostensibly the right is.
History, when it comes to Austria and Germany, history's never far away.
Right.
I'm not sure I like those analogies, and I read them and I just kind of put it to the side. I don't want to. I'm not there yet. Okay, I mean. Germany has come clean with its crimes, and more than any other country. Okay, certainly the Japanese haven't done it. Okay, and well, we're just Austrians. We were just Austrians. Okay, but there's a very technocratic technocratic element of their psyche. Okay, I've worked with Germans all my adult life. I've lived abroad most of my adult life, my entire life, not my only adult life. And so there's a certain way of approaching problems when Germans have it, okay? And it is very specific, okay?
Yes, no,
and I have to say, without offending anyone, it's humorless, okay?
Yes, no, I think that's right. What's interesting is how the Germans have kind of, they've really just transformed themselves. I mean, it's like, people change. I mean, you're not the same person you were, say, 20 years ago or 40 years ago. The Germans just completely changed. I mean, the Germans of today really bear no resemblance to the Germans before World War I, before World War II, or before World War I. I mean, those Germans, not only obviously the militarism, of which they were very proud, but they had a real kind of foreign policy energy. I mean, everybody knew about how the Germans would just move into any area at all. Whether it's the Balkans or the Middle East. There was always some ruthless, energetic German attempt to gain a political advantage against someone else, or to you get some investment opportunity. I mean, everyone just knew, that the Germans had this kind of manic energy when it came to asserting their national interest. It just, that's just gone from the Germans of today.
Again, this kind of fascinating fascism thing. I mean, because I think you've already mentioned it. I mean, if it weren't for the Holocaust and related issues, forced labor and stuff like that,
right.
The Hitler and the Nazis would have been kind of put in the category of, well, Napoleon tried it and he failed too.
Right.
It's very different, everyone.
Yes.
And I think that you see this, there's a really weird admiration, like for the Wehrmacht, okay?
Yes.
I mean, it's really difficult. It's an admiration for efficiency. It's certain elements of modernism, of the modern project, that are focused in on, and it's revered. Okay, yes. What the problem is that kind of efficiency, if used for the wrong reasons, turns it into a hellscape, and that's what we have.
I think so, and I think that even now, when you have military historians who write about World War II, like this guy Max Hastings, they always write with great admiration for the German military. I mean, for instance, when this recent book about Arnhem, and Max Hastings was reviewing it somewhere, and he said that whenever you make a mistake, the Germans really punish you, and the British make mistakes in Arnhem, and the Germans they make you pay. I mean, it's like they were so effective, they're so brilliant in their strategy, and their ability to maneuver quickly and effectively. It was just dazzling. Even in the last days of World War II, they still managed to pull off a victory in Arnhem. I mean, this is already in 1945, and they still managed to pull off a victory. The Battle of the Bulge. I mean, that could have gone the other way. So. I think there is, what you call the fascinating fashion, there is an admiration, particularly, many people, boys like soldiers and like military stuff, people kind of admire the brilliance of the German generals. But then, of course, it's very hard how to separate all of that from the Hitler and the atrocities.
I mean, it's interesting. There's YouTube is doing everything in its power to wipe away, disappear some of the best documentaries. The World at War It's almost completely gone. I know that they colorized it. Maybe it's for IP reasons. It's one of the greatest documentaries ever made. But it's really interesting in some of them, and I'm always attuned to this. This Paulus was a administrative general. He wasn't a Nazi. And so I don't buy into that. I don't like making that differentiation, okay? They were fighting for a very murderous regime, and they knew what kind of war they were fighting in the East, okay? They knew this is a war of annihilation. Now, so there's no way you can put a nice spin on that, okay? And we know that because Stalin said, you want a war of annihilation, we will give you one. Right. And he did.
No, I think that's right. I mean, these were career generals. They served in the Wehrmacht. They had their orders. They got their orders, and this came up in Nuremberg. I mean, Nuremberg. Yep. I think particularly with Goering. I mean, Goering's kind of famous defense, quite interesting and quite effective defense. Saying, well, all these generals came and they basically implemented, as you say, this murderous campaign. And it says, well, what do you expect? I mean, the generals come in and they're given their orders and they implement their orders. I mean, you can't just have one general says, well, I'm not going to show up, and another says, I'll call it a day. I mean, that's what happens, and I think that was the case. I mean, of course, they knew all about the horrific atrocities. They didn't care much about it. I mean, they just didn't even think. They just left the SS to do whatever the SS was doing, and they focused on the battles.
What that does is it creates a way out for not being held responsible, and that's the dilemma that we have. Okay, and you've characterized it just perfect. Okay, I was just following orders. But then at the same time, where's your humanity? Because and that's where it was absent. Okay, one of the things, like I said, he wanted, we could take Berlin, and he just said, no, I'm going to lose my soldiers. Right. And plus, getting the war over early, because when Roosevelt was still alive. He said, when can we get this finished? Because these soldiers, there are millions of them. They're voters, and an election is coming up. Okay, and a lot of dead soldiers make people very unhappy. Okay, yes. I mean that's a very different way of approaching it. Okay, right. And so I can't even convey to people here on December 4th, 2021. How the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, weighs on Russia, weighs on it so heavily. And we started out by talking about these nincompoops running American foreign policy vis-a-vis Ukraine as we speak right now. That that's just a whole lot. Okay.
Yes. No, I that's right. But I think it is the case that the perception of the war has changed as the decades have gone on. I mean, look, my parents, they were in the Soviet Union at the time of the invasion, and yet, talk about this, do this and that. It was done, without any, there was no anguish about this. Like my father, he knew all about it. He knew if the Germans win, he'd be dead. But Albert Speer's just written his book. Must get Albert Speer's book. There was a kind of, people who had lived it were still kind of interested in it, and it's part of your life. That's it. Now, as the years go by, it just grows in magnitude, and I think that's part of it. That is, that an event appears much bigger than I think than it did at the time. At the time, okay, that's just part of your life. You move on. But now it just grows just in magnitude.
But actually, it's the modus operandi of empire. Okay, that this is it's really interesting. I saw this some reviews how there were people part of what we would call the national security state then, thinking yes, we should take on a global empire. Okay, and then as time goes on, the reason for it is because we won the Second World War. And because we won the Second World War, we won the Cold War. I mean, all of these things start being, they're discrete. But I mean, you can create a narrative that connects them all together. I mean, this is the thing, is that we won the war. That means
Yes.
you, the loser, must submit. Okay,
Right.
and that paradigm worked. I mean, Germany was absolutely gutted and destroyed. Japan was too. And so when you have the end of the Cold War, which you, George, and I agree on, some of our viewers don't agree with, Russia opted, the Soviet Union opted out of the Cold War.
Right.
It wasn't defeated. But see, when you have this World War II paradigm, they can't let it go. No, you lost. You have to do what we say. Okay.
That's right. That's right. And I think that's why they said, well, we won the Second World War. So why did we give anything to the Soviet Union? And they just don't fully appreciate. Yeah, you won the Second World War because of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So therefore, the Soviet Union is going to want, it's going to want its winnings. I mean, it's not just going to say, oh, well, okay, we did our bit. Now we'll just go away, and then you can happily take over the whole of Europe. And that's why there is this mentality. Well, we sold out Eastern Europe. It was all
nothing you can do about it.
Yalta, or and that has been around, throughout the Cold War. The sellout at Yalta. They don't even realize there was no alternative right up until, June 1944. All of the heavy lifting, every part of the heavy lifting was done by the Soviet Union. There was no way you were just going to deny the Soviet Union the fruits of its victory, the fruits of its sacrifice.
It happens in war, folks, from time immemorial. Right, George, maybe the last one, because I got to get it ready for tomorrow's recording.
Okay, so we have Jay Gold. Thank you so much. It was a super chat. It says juniors generals, but no one has acknowledged General Mark Milley's prowess. He can annihilate the buffet single-handed.
I'm glad my buffet meme is penetrating our audience. Okay.
And then he says, seriously, how screwed is the USA? Well, I do think that given Milley's abysmal performance, what we know from the Bob Woodward book, and which Milley has not denied. In fact, Milley has essentially confirmed in Essentials. He almost got the United States into a very serious conflict with China by saying, he gets onto the phone to the Chinese and tells them, I know you're worried that Trump might attack you, but don't worry about anything. Trump isn't going to attack you. And even if Trump does attack you, I'll give you a heads up beforehand. Can you imagine somebody saying that to the Chinese and how the Chinese would interpret such a thing? He could have got himself into a very serious war with China over that.
Should have been fired.
Of course he should have been.
But it shows, I think the first question was, how do we explain the incompetence of our elites? Well, just look at Mark Milley, okay? Yeah. What did Tucker call him? Thoroughly modern?
Thoroughly modern Milley.
All right, I got to go, guys. Okay.
All right, then. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, everybody who contributed. Thank you above all to everyone who contributed on the super chats. Really appreciate it. That's very, very generous of you. We will be back next week at the same time. We're going to have another fun, interesting conversations. I hope you will all be back. And we love doing this. We made a commitment. We will be here next Saturday at the same time. Thank you all. Thank you, Peter. And we'll see you soon. And remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.